for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. This is not just a war over stolen land. Why do you think little boys are throwing stones at tanks? And we'll never really know how many people are dead. They drop bombs on innocent girls while they sleep in their bed. Israel is a terror state, they're terrorists that terrorize. I'll testify my television, televise them telling lies. How many more resolutions have to be violated? How many more children have to be annihilated? This is not a war, it is systematic genocide. But whatever they try, Palestine will never die. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Hello, I'm Chris Williamson, and this is Palestine Declassified, where we highlight the struggle to liberate Palestine and expose the Zionist regime's frantic efforts to influence international policymakers and global public opinion. In today's show, we'll be discussing the implications of the British state using technology produced by Zionist-controlled companies to surveil British citizens. In our first report, Latif Abouchakra named some of these companies which have been allowed to infiltrate the UK's key institutions.
The cornerstone of a sovereign nation is the absolute control over its own justice, its own data, and its own watchmen. Yet today, the very machinery of British law enforcement is being quietly and systemically outsourced. The British government has allowed the digital and physical infrastructure of the state to become a high-tech extension of a foreign power, driven by the pernicious influence of Zionism, an ideology that prioritizes the expansion of a foreign ethno-entity over the rights of people in the UK. This is not merely a matter of procurement, it is a surrender of independence. By embedding Zionist-linked firms into the heartbeat of British society, the government is importing a surveillance philosophy rooted in the subjugation of one people and applying it to their own subjects. These are combat-proven technologies forged in the fires of the Gaza genocide, and they are now the primary eyes and ears of the Metropolitan Police. The police uses Israeli intelligence firm Celebrite to unlock the phones and private lives of their own citizens, and Elbit subsidiary NICE Systems to manage the digital evidence of cases. They also use BriefCam to track people's movements through video synopsis. BriefCam is a company co-founded by Gideon Ben-Zvi, a veteran of the IOF's elite Unit 8200 intelligence corps, who openly admits to using Unit 8200 criteria to lead his ventures. The reach of foreign intelligence into the streets is even more direct through CoreSight AI, which provides facial recognition throughout the country. Born as a subsidiary of Cortica, it was founded by Egal Reichenraus, another alumnus of the Zionist military intelligence apparatus. When our faces are scanned by software overseen by the architects of the occupation, can we truly say that the British public is being policed by British consent? But the intrusion goes deeper than software. It reaches the very hands of our officers on the front lines. ISPRA, an Israeli specialist in riot control, has historically supplied the crowd management munitions used to police the streets. When the tools used to suppress dissent in the UK are manufactured by a firm specializing in the containment of occupied territories, the line between domestic policing and foreign military occupation begins to blur. Furthermore, Motorola Solutions Israel, a company listed by the United Nations for its links to illegal settlements, is now deep inside our research projects. Through initiatives like CREST and Connections, they're building predictive policing tools designed to monitor the social media content and online lives of the British public. When a company that facilitates surveillance in the West Bank is the same one mapping the future crimes of Londoners, we have fundamentally compromised our domestic integrity.
As usual, I'm joined in the studio by the co-director of the lobbying watchdog Spinwatch and the UK's leading scholarly critic of Israel, David Miller. David's also a senior research fellow at the Centre for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zayim University. Joining us again as our guest contributor today is the broadcaster, former political editor of today's News Talk, and a regular contributor to UK Column, Basil Valentine. Welcome to the show. Well, first of all, David, let's start with the arrest of Latifa Abubakar, our colleague there, who we've just heard from, when she was on her way to speak at an event where you were also on the platform in Birmingham at the weekend.
So this was just last Sunday. It was the launch of the anti-Zionist movement. I'm one of the founding members, and I was on the platform. Latifa was on the platform as well, and it appears that she was followed by West Midlands traffic cops on the say-so of the Metropolitan Police, and she was followed and cut off by several police cars, plainclothes police cars, who stopped her, slammed her door open, grabbed her out and took her to the police station, where she was kept overnight before they finally interviewed her the next day in the afternoon, accused her of, under the Public Order Act, of conduct likely to stir up racial hatred, to do with stuff which she'd put on social media, including as far back as the 7th of October 2023, the date of the launch of Al-Aqsa Flood. Incredible stuff. She was cross-examined and interrogated in a completely ridiculous way, as you would expect by the police. And of course, they've now put bail conditions on her, which is going to restrict her movements. And indeed, she's been forbidden from attending any events to do with Palestine, of course, which means she can't do her job as a reporter, which is completely absurd.
It's incredible that they can devote so much police time and resources to dealing with people who are simply protesting and objecting to genocide.
Well, you say that, but of course what's happened is that the Zionists have infiltrated and occupied the administration of justice in the UK, and we can see that perfectly clearly from all of these examples. Otherwise, none of this would be happening. And instead, what they would be doing is prosecuting people who were engaged in supporting genocide, which is, of course, thousands of Zionists in this country, and indeed foreign Zionists who visit here.
It's state capture, isn't it?
It is.
State capture. Well, Basil, just going back to Latifa's report, would it be fair to say that the kind of deals that Latifa was talking about in her report there has effectively integrated Israel into the UK's police service?
Well, Chris, the fact that I'm slightly nervous about answering that question should tell viewers everything they need to know. But in addition to those deals, the simple fact is that a number of British anti-Zionist journalists have been very roughly treated by the UK police for the crime of speaking out against the slaughter that we've seen in Gaza, and dealt with in a way that mirrors the treatment of Palestinians. But as David said, the Israelification of law and order in Britain extends way beyond the police and these deals right the way through the court system. Tim Crossland of Defend Our Juries, who was in court last week on one of the spurious terrorism charges related to holding up a placard. He is a lawyer himself, and he's pointed out how the legal system has been turned into a process where judges, barristers and officials are cowed into not speaking out against the obvious crime of genocide and the moral imperative to do so, and instead are playing along with this Zionization of the judicial system in order to advance their own careers and because they don't want to upset the apple cart.
No, indeed, it certainly seems that way for sure, Basil. But David, we talked about state capture a moment ago, didn't we? What about the rest of the UK's security services? Has the same thing happened to them as we've seen with the police service?
Well, if you take the intelligence services, for example, let's take the GCHQ, MI5, the domestic intelligence service, and MI6, the foreign service. Well, look, back in the 1940s, British intelligence services said that the main threat, national security threat that the UK faced was from Jewish terrorism,
yes,
as they called it.
Yes.
And all the way through this period, there have been incidents where the Mossad have done operations in this country which have been looked rather dimly upon by UK governments, including the government of Mrs. Thatcher, who famously shut down the Mossad station when they assassinated Naji al-Ali, the famous Palestinian cartoonist, in 1987 in Knightsbridge. They were again expelled in 1994 when it appeared to the intelligence services that the Mossad had bombed its own embassy, as has been declared by former MI5 officers themselves. But it's only really when you come to the period after 9/11 where there's an overhaul of the whole security philosophy and the introduction of an explicitly anti-Muslim counter-terrorism policy associated with a guy called David Omand, who was the head of GCHQ. And from that moment on, you have essentially Zionist assumptions built into all of British security policy. So that's the way in which the intelligence services in particular have been colonised and occupied by the Zionists.
Right, okay. Well, Basil, I mean, what's the problem, in your opinion, with Israel's facial recognition technology then being used for the UK streets?
Well, absolutely everything is wrong with it, Chris. Gaza has been a laboratory of horror for a lot of military technology, something often cited by the manufacturers in their marketing pitch. So I'm curious to know whether Coresight AI mentioned that to Digital Barriers, the UK company tasked by Blue Light Commercial, itself the Home Office's procurement agency, when lobbying for the contract. Did they say, look, this facial technology works well in Gaza and has been used in the genocide, so why not use it in Britain? Now, the Action on Armed Violence, the lobby group, asked Essex Police where there's been a pilot. Did they meet with representatives of Coresight AI, and they refused to comply with the Freedom of Information request, later saying that to give that answer would take up too much time and resources. So there's a tremendous lack of transparency around all this. And we have to ask ourselves, of all the burgeoning AI companies, why is it necessary for the UK government to outsource this to Israel, of all places? Surely there are British companies. I mean, personally, I don't like the idea of facial recognition software being in operation in our streets anyway. Of course not. It's a horrific thought. But if you are going to have it, why not do it with a British company?
Indeed, or indeed, why externalise it at all, actually? But anyway, that's another argument that we might have about the whole neoliberal economic agenda. But David, I mean, what do you make of the revelation in our report there that these companies are linked then to the Zionist entity's intelligence unit known as Unit H200?
Well, there are several things to say about that. Basil's just made the point about the testing them on Palestinian children, which of course is a moral argument about it and should be taken on board. But actually there's a much more significant and much more dangerous problem here, which is that Unit 8200 has adopted a strategy, it's the foreign policy strategy of the Zionist entity, to send its former members of staff out into creating tech startups. They call themselves Startup Nation. And most of these startups are tech companies, lots of them, there are really a huge amount of them which are engaged in spyware, in surveillance, in drone technology, and all of those things. And the purpose of these is to infiltrate the domestic markets all around the world on behalf of the Zionist entity. And many of them will have, and we know this from the NSO groups, Pegasus software, we know this from Celebrite and from Nice Systems, many of them have a back door, which means that all of the data that they gather from the FBI or from the British police goes straight back to Tel Aviv. So that's the problem.
No, indeed. Absolutely shocking. Well, Basil, I mean, what's wrong then with the British establishment? I mean, it seems to have no shame.
Well, Chris, I recently saw the film Palestine 36, which depicts some abhorrent acts by the British state 90 years ago. So there's nothing new about the UK establishment having no shame. But even now, you will struggle to find a single UK official, diplomat or government representative willing to admit that Israel has and is committing genocide, in spite of all the evidence from human rights organizations and the United Nations that it has. Although, of course, just this week, it has come out that Wes Streeting, the health secretary, in a WhatsApp message to Peter Mandelson, of all people, said, and I quote, "Israel is committing war crimes before our eyes. I have met with our own medics out there who described the most chilling and distressing scenes of calculated brutality against women and children. Now, that continues to this day, of course, over 1,500 ceasefire violations. But the fact is that Streeting is pointing out a contradiction at the heart of government, which is that under UK law, we should not be supplying any kind of weapons. In fact, we should be sanctioning any country carrying out war crimes. And yet it seems to be business as normal. The only thing that seems to shame the British establishment into resignations is association with Jeffrey Epstein.
Indeed. Very good point. Well made, Basil. Well, we're going to move on now to our next report, which exposes the links between the Zionist movement and Lionel Idan. He's a senior prosecutor with the Crown Prosecution Service and its national spokesperson on hate crime.
Lionel Idan is a key British prosecutor serving as the chief Crown prosecutor for the CPS and also the national hate crime lead. He is currently being heavily lobbied by a network of powerful Zionist groups. We're not just talking about casual meetings. Idan has held repeated engagements with the Israeli embassy and Zionist lobby groups, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and the Community Security Trust CST, an organization headed by convicted fraudster Gerald Ronson. The objective is clear: to ensure the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS, fully adopts the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, a definition weaponized against anti-Zionists, as we saw during the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. Lionel Idan has not hidden these alliances. In an op-ed for the Jewish News, he boasted that the CPS sits on the Anti-Semitism Working Group, alongside the CSD and the Jewish Leadership Council. He confirmed that lobby groups, the CSD and the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, are now core members of the CPS External Consultative Group on Hate Crime. Perhaps most concerning is that the national prosecution guidance is being shaped by these very groups. Idan has admitted that their involvement helps the CPS define the line where anti-Zionism becomes a criminal offense. When the person overseeing London's prosecutions attends Israel lobby annual dinners to celebrate new security task forces, where is the independence of the UK legal system? It should be demanded that the CPS remains an impartial body, free from the influence of political lobbyists and foreign interests.
Well, David, I mean, just before we went to that report, I mean, we were expressing concerns about the UK's security services, but I know that you've also got concerns, haven't you, about the independence of the Crown Prosecution Service. I wonder whether you might just sort of take us through some of its recent decisions that's kind of brought you to that conclusion.
Well, I mean, the Crown Prosecution Service, as has been shown by a myriad of different reports, has been clearly massively biased in relation to questions of Palestine action and other Palestine protests, and has been reluctant to take any cases against Zionist genocidaires. There have been all sorts of reports about particular connections and contacts between the Zionist entity and the CPS, and indeed the passing of data from one of the Palestine action cases to the Zionist entities has been part of that, so that they can therefore target decision making inside the CPS and indeed the people who are being arrested and charged. So that's part of the story. But we also have the fact that the top two positions in the Attorney General's office are staffed by Jewish Zionists. I mean, it's truly extraordinary that that's the case. And of course, we've got this guy Idan here, who's on a working group with the CST and the Jewish Leadership Council. Yes. These are, of course, Zionist organisations, as everybody knows, and of course there is no countervailing weight on any of these panels.
Yeah, I mean, further evidence of state capture.
That's right.
Well, Basil, I mean, is it appropriate then, in your opinion, for CPS officials to be repeatedly hosted by the Israeli embassy, or actually any other embassy for that, any other foreign embassy for that matter?
Absolutely not, Chris. I mean, we would like to think that all aspects of our judiciary and law and order system are entirely independent of any foreign influence. But the simple fact is that the detention of the Filton 24 under terrorism legislation is almost certainly directly as a result of those meetings, because we know that the Israeli government likes to characterize all oppositions to its war crimes as terrorism. It was in June of last year that more than 20 international legal organizations issued an open letter to the authorities in the UK requesting that the government urgently cease the misuse of counter-terrorism legislation against the Filton detainees. Now, the CPS has to take on board the fact that the no guilty verdicts were returned last week at Woolwich Crown Court and change its course because precedent is a key part of our legal system.
Indeed. Well, David, I mean, sticking with the theme of state capture, just tell us, will you, about the UK's Attorney General?
So the UK's Attorney General is a guy called Richard Hermer, who is a Zionist Jew, was appointed by Keir Starmer, was Zionist without qualification, as he said he was. And of course, Hermer was someone who has a kind of pedigree of legal work in the area of being critical of Zionist excesses. So now, he's not an anti-Zionist, of course, but he wouldn't be a Likudnik. But he would be a liberal or left-wing Zionist. So they've put a Zionist in charge of the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office oversees the Crown Prosecution Service. So that's the whole thing. It's being overseen by a Zionist Jew. The second person in charge in the office is the Solicitor General. She's called Sarah Sackman. She's a former leading member of the Jewish Labour Movement, the Zionist organisation within the Labour Party, which was essential and central to bringing down Jeremy Corbyn, Corbyn as the elected Labour leader. So these are people who are fanatics, who are genocidal fanatics, and who are clearly not capable of taking decisions on questions of Palestine which have anything like the lack of bias, which is what the law is supposed to accomplish.
Indeed. I mean, bringing down Corbyn, of course, destroyed the hopes of millions of people who had put their trust in Corbyn to bring about fundamental change in the country. But Basil, I mean, how is all this likely to impact, do you think, on the Crown Prosecution Services? I mean, it seems really extraordinary, doesn't it?
Well, immediately after the acquittals at Woolwich Crown Court last week, the Crown Prosecution Service immediately posted on X that it was going to seek retrials on those counts for which the juries could not reach a verdict. But it's worth remembering that the 6 that appeared in court in recent weeks were the only people that actually entered the Elbit factory. Now, all 24 were charged on what's called joint enterprise, which means that the other 18 who didn't even enter the factory are surely not guilty of the charges that the others were acquitted of. But to date, they're still being held under terrorism legislation, and it was the Crown Prosecution itself that called on the courts to treat these cases as having a terrorist connection, which is in itself an utterly nebulous term that really doesn't mean anything at all. It's to be hoped that the judicial review upcoming will overturn the ban on Palestine action, but after the replacement of the original Mr. Justice Chamberlain with the panel of 3 judges, who I'm sure David would agree were arguably much more favourable to the Zionist cause, and then it's very doubtful whether that will indeed be overturned.
No, absolutely. Well, David, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I've been increasingly, frustrated about the way the state has been sort of dealing with this whole issue. I mean, what can we do to sort of challenge this?
So we have to engage in counter lawfare. The Zionists are engaged in lawfare to try and make sure that people are pressured or arrested by the police, that they're banged up, they're sent away for a long period of time. They've changed the law in order to make that more easy. So we have to fight back against that. Now, obviously, the thing to do is we need to start to close down these Zionist organisations which are doing this. And we're starting to see some victories in that respect. For example, the campaigning against anti-Semitism, which currently has a live case against me, and there was recently a case which it lost really very, very badly. And there's been two or three different judgments in different legal cases where the judge has condemned the campaign against anti-Semitism, but nevertheless, it's still acting as if it's a neutral body to give training on anti-Semitism to all sorts of legal bodies. So that has to be the first thing we aim at, is to cut it all together out of these organisations, and then these organisations will possibly be able to make better decisions as a result.
Yeah. Well, finally, Basil, and very briefly, because we're almost out of time, I mean, what do you make of the moves by some elements of the establishment to get rid of jury trials?
Absolutely abysmal, Chris. Jury trials are arguably the single most important statement of Magna Carta, the foundational document of human rights and democracy globally. And the fact that we are not judged by the state, but instead by a jury of our peers, is absolutely central to the whole concept of justice. The excuse that people in the government are trying to use is that there's a huge backlog of cases, in which case then put more resources into it, rather than planning for completely idiotic wars against Russia that can never be fought. The independence of the jury, as demonstrated in the Filton case last week, is absolutely vital and the single most important bulwark against tyranny that we have.
No, indeed. Well, listen, I would love to go on longer because I'm sure there's a lot more that we would like to say, but I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. So I'd like to thank our guest, Basil Valentine. And if you want to see more of our content, you can follow the show on X, Facebook, Rumble and Telegram. And make a date to join us again on Palestine Declassified next week, when I'll be back alongside David Miller with more revelations and information that you won't find in the corporate media. But until then, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now.